Before we enter Aaron Hernandez's secret files, leave the like and subscribe to the channel. Here, the truth that the NFL preferred to keep buried always comes to the fore. He was born in a world where glory seemed inevitable, but darkness was already hanging around unnoticed. The Connecticut camps witnessed the birth of a prodigy, a boy who ran with anger and hope at the same time. With each pass received, it seemed to carry the weight of a life that demanded perfection. The smile he showed to the public hid the suffocating pressure inside the house. His father was an idolized figure in the community, but feared between silent walls. The discipline was hard, rigid, shaping Aaron into a ruthless athlete and a divided young man. When his father passed away, the world collapsed under his feet, opening a crack that would never close again. He sought consolation where there was none, let the emptiness feed a colder version of himself. He began to approach dangerous circles, looking for belonging in the chaos. But in the field, it was pure poetry, explosive, elegant, deadly on short routes. Universities wanted him as a perfect offensive weapon, a rough diamond surrounded by rumors. Florida Gators accepted him as a star, even knowing that his life off the field was a minefield. Behind the scenes, small incidents began to arise, but they were muffled by talent and victories. Aaron learned quickly that, in American football, talent buys silence. Fame grew, but with it grew the darkness he kept hidden. Each touchdown masked internal conflicts that no one dared to address. The coaches saw unlimited potential, but ignored the alarms playing in the background. He passed the image of an indestructible warrior, but inside, he fought against ghosts. Father's ghost, the pressure, the need to prove something that not even he understood. And so the legend was born, and, at the same time, the curse. The promising boy was turning into a divided man. Two sides walked inside him, the brilliant athlete and the tormented young man. The stadium shouted his name with pride, while the silence of the night called him back to the alleys. Each victory cost something he didn't realize he was missing. In the eyes of the world, Aaron was just promise, not danger. But broken promises always charge a price. And the double life began long before the public imagined. The first signs were there, hidden between the lines of a too early glow. He was loved, admired, respected, but deeply misunderstood. The spotlights illuminated the athlete, while overshadowing the man behind him. The past marked his skin invisibly, shaping his future choices. And while everyone celebrated his ascension, no one saw the abyss growing under their feet. The tragedy did not begin at the end. It began here, in childhood, in loss, in silence. Aaron Hernandez's legend was built with glory, but cemented in trauma. And every step he took toward stardom brought him closer to the darkness that would define his destiny. In the brightness of the stands, no one imagined the storm that would come. The prodigy boy walked toward stardom and collapse at the same time. A hero on the rise and a tragedy in preparation. His life was about to become an enigma for the whole world. And the signs were already in sight, but few wanted to see. This is the beginning of the story of a giant who carried shadows greater than his glory. A young man trapped between expectations and wounds never healed. His life, from an early age, was a silent struggle against himself. And the NFL still had no idea of the storm it was about to sign. Because Aaron Hernandez was not just a promise, it was a dormant volcano. And the world would soon find out in the most brutal way. White heavy checkmark at the University of Florida, Aaron found the perfect stage to shine and get lost at the same time. The stands vibrated with his athletic explosion, as if he had been created for that show. But behind the scenes, his behavior was already a time bomb about to detonate. Coaches tried to guide their talent while deviating from the rumors that circulated through the corridors. The parties became escape routes, mixing alcohol, ego, and dangerous impulses. He began to adopt a persona that no one controlled, neither friends, nor technicians, nor himself. Disciplinary problems arose, but they were pushed under the carpet in the name of victories. The college program needed players like him, not scandals. And so, incidents disappeared, records were forgotten, witnesses were silent. Aaron learned what many athletes learn early: success buys silence. He lived as a student loved by the public and feared by those who knew him closely. The nights lasted in confrontations, fights, and risky associations. But every Sunday he reinforced his hero narrative, the hero that Florida needed. The routes were perfect, The receptions impeccable, the force almost superhuman. The field was his refuge, the only place where his mind seemed to find order. The more he shone in the game, the darker his life outside of it became. Internal conflicts increased, fueled by traumas, addictions, and uncontrolled impulses. Fame brought admirers, but it also brought people who fed his darkest side. Aaron didn't know, but he was turning into a figure of extremes, loved and feared, brilliant and unpredictable. The coaches preferred to ignore their lapses, believing that talent compensated for everything. But ignoring a volcano does not prevent the eruption. And inside him, something was boiling, a mixture of anger, pain, and the need for affirmation. The pressure increased, and he responded with physical strength, but emotional instability. The past still screamed, and the present pushed him to the limit. Friends tried to help him, but there was no way to rescue someone who didn't want to be rescued. Every year, the distance between the athlete and the man grew, creating an irreparable crack. And when the NFL knocked on the door, offering money, fame, and power, Aaron believed he would finally find peace. But the NFL doesn't save anyone, it amplifies who you already are. And Aaron carried a chaos that the league was not yet prepared to face. When he signed with the Patriots, many believed that he would leave the past behind. But the past does not accept to be forgotten so easily. He came along, hidden in the shadows of the new life. Old friends, old habits, old impulses, everyone went through the NFL gate with him. The stadium where he dreamed of playing would become the stage of his rise and fall. His hands, once a symbol of talent, would become a symbol of something much darker. The Patriots saw potential where there was also risk, but they did not see the depth of the abyss. In the eyes of the world, Aaron was the new star of the franchise. But the shadows walked with him, silent, disguised as a distant past. And no one imagined what was about to emerge from this darkness. Neither the team, nor the NFL, nor the public. The double life was about to reach its peak. And the university paradise would be remembered only as the prologue of a devastating collapse. Because Aaron Hernandez wasn't just climbing, he was about to plummet. And the fall would be historic. If this investigation is holding your attention so far, consider signing up. The more support you give, the deeper we can dig into the shadows of the NFL and reveal what they try to hide. White heavy check mark. The arrival in New England seemed like the beginning of a new life, a possible redemption. The Patriots gave him money, structure, and the chance to clear his name. But no one realized that he didn't just want to start over, he wanted to hide who he was. The modern facilities, the disciplined coaches, the rigid culture seemed ideal to shape him. But impeccable structures do not heal deep wounds. His talent was undeniable, explosive, almost inhuman in short routes and brute force. The public began to treat him as a hero, as a symbol of rebirth. But the hero and the man were in silent war. Aaron lived between two worlds, the exemplary professional and the young man who was still looking for belonging in the chaos. Even with millionaire contracts, he maintained dangerous ties with figures of the past. Men who lived on the margins of the law, but who offered the distorted comfort that he recognized. Increasingly, Aaron isolated himself from the players, creating his own circle in the shadows. The Patriots were not suspicious of the depth of their connections. He trained with fierce intensity, but lived with growing paranoia. He felt chased, observing cars, windows, shadows that didn't even exist. This paranoia would shape his subsequent decisions tragically. He installed security systems at home, as if he was preparing for an invisible war. The cameras revealed fear, not protection. Meanwhile, in the field, he became one of the greatest offensive weapons in the league. Belichick saw in him a perfect tool to master defenses. And Aaron delivered impeccable performance, as if he was compensating for internal chaos. But each touchdown was a cry for help that no one heard. Fame grew, but with it, the risk also increased. He lived in two parallel universes, the award-winning athlete and the man surrounded by shadows. The millionaire contract signed his glory and, at the same time, sealed his destiny. With more money, more excesses, more dangers, more secrets came. Your house has become a psychological bunker. And inside him, Aaron became hostage to his own impulses. His distorted fears collided with his privileged reality. But the past he tried to bury began to resurface. Old conflicts came back with force, attracted by the new luxurious life. And by trying to control everything, he lost control of himself. The double life was no longer sustainable, and he was close to collapse. The Patriots didn't realize what was happening off the field. And the NFL, once again, ignored the signals. Meanwhile, Aaron walked to an inevitable point of no return. A fatal encounter between impulses, fear, violence, and fate. And when that moment came, the world would be in shock. Because the hero of New England was about to reveal his darkest face. And the history of the sport would never be the same again. White heavy checkmark Aaron's life became a labyrinth of decisions guided more by fear than by reason. He surrounded himself with people who reinforced his worst impulses, as if he wanted to hide from his own reflection. The days were intense training, and the late nights were meetings with figures who should never approach the NFL. The friends who came from his old life seemed more present than the teammates. They found in him not the millionaire star, but the impulsive boy who sought acceptance. And Aaron gave them space, opening doors that should remain closed. Paranoia grew, fueled by habits, substances, and a past that insisted on returning. Every parked car aroused suspicion, every noise in the backyard seemed like a threat. His house became an emotional bunker, full of cameras and reinforced locks. But no physical protection was able to contain the internal storm. He lived in a cycle where power and vulnerability collided. Money gave him status, but it also attracted greed and conflicts. And then a night came that would be the milestone of his accelerated fall. A night like so many, but loaded with invisible tension. Aaron went out with friends, trying to relieve the pressure he felt. But the weather was strange, silent, as if something was about to collapse. Subtle discussions emerged, suspicious looks, small sparks of conflict. And Aaron, already dominated by anxiety and imaginary danger, reacted with contained aggressiveness. The dawn seemed denser than usual, heavier, more threatening. The empty streets reflected the silent chaos that was forming. And on the way home, an impulsive decision would turn suspicions into disaster. The distorted survival instinct began to command his actions. He believed he was being betrayed, observed, disrespected. And in his mind, this couldn't go unanswered. The lines between reality and paranoia have become blurred. And Aaron crossed a point of no return without realizing it. That moment would be remembered as the beginning of the end. And the story of a millionaire athlete would begin to clash with the world of crime. Nothing else would be the same from that night on. What would come later would be investigated for months, maybe years. But what no one knew is that the real reasons were buried in Aaron's broken psyche. The NFL continued, indifferent, as if nothing was about to explode. And the world would only find out too late what really happened that morning. Witnesses would change versions, cameras would bring more questions than answers. And the public would watch perplexed as the case grew in complexity. The secrets that Aaron kept began to leak through the cracks of his life. And every detail revealed would be more disturbing than the previous one. The man New England celebrated was the same one who sank into a dangerous game. And that step towards darkness would only be the first. Because the approaching tragedy was too big to be contained. And the night that changed everything would become the ghost that would haunt Aaron until the end. The fall had already begun, silent, inevitable, devastating. White heavy checkmark, the case began with a body found in an isolated terrain, away from the lights and close to silence. Odin Lloyd, a semi-professional player, lying there as if the world had turned its back on him. The news spread slowly, like a rumor that no one wanted to believe. But quickly, Aaron's name began to appear in the whispered conversations. A name too big to be linked to something so dark. The police began to put the pieces together, following traces that seemed unlikely. But at each step, the path unexpectedly pointed in the same direction. Exchanged messages, signs of tension, meetings before the fatal dawn. And a complicated relationship that the investigators tried to decipher. When the detectives knocked on the door of Aaron's mansion, it was as if the world had stopped for a moment. Cameras recorded a disturbing calm while he received the agents. But in the internal recordings of the house, there were clues that contradicted him. Hasty movements, objects being hidden, doors being locked. The police realized that there was something much bigger than they imagined. Odin Lloyd had family ties with Aaron, making the case even more enigmatic. Why would someone with so much to lose be involved in such a risky crime? This question echoed in the news, in the locker rooms, throughout the country. The Patriots were silent, shocked, trying to protect the franchise. But there was no way to contain a scandal of that magnitude. The investigations began to point to Aaron as the centerpiece of the case. Witnesses described strange behaviors, mysterious messages, a night full of tension. And the world began to see the double life he hid. The image of the exemplary athlete collapsed in front of the cameras. Public confidence turned into disbelief. How could a millionaire player, living the American dream, be linked to a murder? The question divided opinions, but the evidence kept emerging. Security cameras showed Aaron returning home at suspicious times. Missing objects raised even greater suspicions. And the friends who were with him that night disappeared or changed their versions. The narrative became increasingly dark. The media was immersed in the case, hungry for details. And Aaron was portrayed as an enigma too complex to be understood. As the investigations progressed, the pressure on the Patriots increased. They needed to position themselves, but any word could create new problems. The franchise cut Aaron quickly, in a cold and calculated gesture. And the athlete who used to be idolized was now shown handcuffed. The fall was abrupt, shocking, almost cinematic. But for Aaron, that was just the beginning of an even deeper spiral. Because Odin Lloyd's case would only reveal the surface of something bigger. And when this surface was broken, the world would discover an even darker story. White heavy checkmark, the image of Aaron being taken by the authorities has become a milestone in NFL history. A millionaire player, young, talented, entering a handcuffed police car. The cameras captured the moment coldly, turning it into a symbol of an abrupt fall. The press didn't talk about anything else. The country was mesmerized by the scandal. The hero became a crime headline in a matter of minutes. And inside the police station, Aaron finally faced the reality he had avoided for so many years. The investigation deepened while he remained silent, trying to control his fears. Lawyers were called, strategists appeared, and the legal war was just beginning. But nothing could erase the image that the world saw that morning. He tried to maintain his posture, but the tension was evident in his eyes. A mixture of anger, frustration, and denial took over his expression. And as the interrogation unfolded, the case became a storm of information. Each new detail was broadcast live, as if the audience were watching a macabre show. Preventive detention put him in a cell where fame meant nothing. The silence of the cold walls was crueler than any shout from the crowd. There, Aaron was just a number, a detainee among so many others. And the fall of his image reached proportions that not even the NFL could control. Sponsors cut ties, fans burned t-shirts, the media fed on chaos. The reputation built over the years dissolved in days. In prison, he tried to understand where everything began to fall apart. But his mind was a battlefield, full of fragmented memories. Guilt, justifications, paranoia, everything was mixed. The imminent trial tormented him, but the isolation was even worse. He wondered who he really was, the brilliant athlete or the destroyed man. And the more I reflected, the more I realized that there was no simple answer. The double life it led for years finally took its toll. The public figure and the private man collided irreversibly. And the country watched this collision with a mixture of horror and fascination. The trial would be a spectacle, but the arrest was already the biggest coup. Aaron tried to hold on to any remnant of control. But he realized that his life was now in the hands of lawyers, detectives, and jurors. It didn't matter how many touchdowns he had scored. It didn't matter how many contracts he had signed. There, in the cold cell, Aaron faced for the first time the brutal truth of his existence. And the story of the hero who became a villain began to gain definitive contours. The tragedy was just beginning to reveal itself. And the whole world watched every step. Prison was not the end. It was the prelude to something even greater. And what would come next would shock even those who believed they had already seen everything. The court was crowded from early, as if everyone wanted to witness the fall of an idol. Cameras, journalists, curious people, everyone watched Aaron with hungry looks. Silence settled whenever he entered the room, handcuffed, but still trying to maintain his posture. The prosecutor's office painted a dark, cold, and calculated portrait of the former tight end of the Patriots. Each word spoken seemed to cross the air with the weight of an anticipated sentence. Witnesses went up to the bench and described strange behaviors. Friends who used to be loyal now told different versions of the same night. Text messages revealed tensions, arguments, and paranoia. And Aaron watched everything with a distant look, as if he were trapped between realities. The defense tried to dismantle the narrative, but each new detail seemed to complicate more. The jurors observed, noted and analyzed each gesture. Images showed Aaron returning home at the critical time. Others showed him deleting recordings, raising even greater suspicions. The prosecutor's office pointed to a pattern of impulsive and violent decisions. And the defense tried to argue that everything was nothing more than coincidences interpreted to the extreme. The audience watched on television, forming instant opinions. Some saw a young man broken by trauma and fame. Others saw a man who hid behind success to commit terrible acts. And the truth seemed to escape through everyone's fingers. The interrogations became theatrical, full of emotion and tension. Each day brought a new revelation that changed the course of the narrative. Lawyers argued with passion, knowing that they were facing a historic case. Aaron remained silent, restless, shaking his hands nervously. He seemed to fight against internal thoughts as chaotic as external accusations. The trial wasn't just about the murder. It was about his identity, his past, his fragmented psyche. Experts were called to analyze his life, as if he were a clinical enigma. And the more they investigated, the more disturbing layers emerged. The relationship with the family, the search for power, the need for respect. Unresolved traumas that gave space to destructive behaviors. The press turned everything into a daily show. And Aaron became the protagonist of a modern tragedy. Each day of judgment seemed to pull him deeper. The defense struggled to keep some hope alive. But the prosecutor's office built a solid narrative as concrete. And the country followed, divided between curiosity and shock. At the back of the room, family members prayed silently. But even they seemed unable to understand how everything got to that point. The trial revealed a brutal truth. Aaron Hernandez was not only a brilliant athlete, but a man who carried darkness that no one wanted to see in time. And in that court, before millions of eyes, his life became an irreversible story. A story where glory and tragedy walked side by side to the final abyss. White heavy checkmark life behind bars has become a dark reality that Aaron never imagined facing. The cell was small, cold and silent, like a cruel reflection of everything he had lost. The initial isolation was suffocating, and time seemed to drag on as if it were trapped in the air. The colorless walls absorbed his thoughts, returning only echoes of regret. He tried to maintain a routine, but the internal chaos consumed any sense of normality. The athlete's body did not serve as protection against the psychological weight of the prison. Every day was a mental war, and Aaron fought against memories that insisted on returning. Loneliness was his only constant companion. And she spoke loudly, louder than any fans who have ever applauded him. Letters arrived, some with support, others with hatred, and all messed with your mind. He read each one as if looking for answers that never came. The guards watched his behavior with caution. They knew when someone was approaching the limit. The paranoia he felt before now intensified without breaks. Shadows in the corners of the cell seemed to move when he tried to sleep. Distant sounds mixed with intrusive thoughts. And the feeling of persecution grew every hour. He tried to train, but the body no longer responded as before. The mind was too fractured to maintain discipline. Other inmates watched him, curious about the presence of a former famous player. Some respected, others provoked, a few tried to get closer. But Aaron kept his distance, building invisible barriers. The days became repetitive, endless, overwhelming. He wrote letters that he never sent, as a way to relieve the internal weight. He described guilt, fears, suspicions, pages full of pain and confusion. Sometimes, he stared at the ceiling for hours, trying to understand his own mind. But the answers were as fragmented as his past. Family visits were painful. Fake smiles covered tears that no one wanted to shed there. Aaron tried to be strong, but with each visit he seemed more distant from the outside world. The prison walls seemed to sting him a little more every day. He had moments of deep silence, moments of anger, moments of nervous laughter. Everything indicated an advanced emotional decline. And mental health professionals sounded alarms that few took seriously. Aaron's fame dissolved in the anonymity of the prison. and he saw himself as a shadow of what he once was. The internal darkness, which he managed to hide for so many years, now completely dominated. And while the trial progressed and the country continued to follow its history, Aaron faced an enemy he could never defeat: himself. The prison not only took away his freedom, he took away his identity, his masks, his defenses, and left exposed only the pain he carried throughout his life. A pain that, in that place, had nowhere to flee. White heavy checkmark Odin Lloyd's case was already explosive enough, but the investigations would soon reveal something even more disturbing. As prosecutors and detectives expanded the scope, strange connections emerged between Aaron and other violent episodes. Past incidents that had been ignored, poorly investigated, or simply forgotten. Suddenly, everything gained new meaning. Stories that seemed like rumors began to show themselves as possible pieces of a bigger puzzle. A shooting in 2012, terrified witnesses, a mysterious car. The police began to revisit old files, looking for patterns. And each new discovery cast an even greater shadow on Aaron. People who used to be afraid to speak now came up with new testimonies. The narrative became more complex, darker, more sinister. And the audience tried to understand how so many signs went unnoticed for so long. Some pointed to the NFL, accusing the league of ignoring violent behavior to protect talents. Others blamed the environment that Aaron chose to surround himself, immersed in dangerous people and situations. But the truth seemed to be somewhere between the two worlds. Investigators found old messages, veiled threats, and signs of retaliation. And all this built an image of someone who lived in a constant state of conflict. It was as if Aaron were two different people, coexisting in the same body. The idolized athlete in the fields and the impulsive man who walked on the edge of chaos. The past not only haunted him, he finally reached him. The 2012 case became a new bomb in the media. Prosecutors now believed that Aaron could be involved in crimes that preceded the murder of Odin Lloyd. And every detail made it seem that his double life was deeper than everyone imagined. Photos appeared, witnesses reappeared, stories were retold from a new perspective. And they all converged to the same point. Aaron Hernandez was at the center of a network of silent violence. The NFL tried to distance itself, but the press wouldn't let it. Reports questioned what the Patriots knew, what they ignored, what they allowed. The league was at the center of the hurricane, trying to protect its image. But the damage was already done. The public began to see Aaron not as an isolated case, but as a symptom of a bigger problem that the sport tried to hide. The past kept bleeding, revealing hidden truths for years. And Aaron, trapped in his cell, discovered that he couldn't control anything else. The narrative escaped from his hands and became a monster of his own. And the world watched, horrified, while the story reached depths that no one imagined possible. It was clear now that the case was not just about a crime, but about a lifetime of shadows finally coming to the fore. White heavy checkmark, the court was taken by a tense silence when the judges returned to the room. Everyone knew that that moment would define not only Aaron's fate, but the way the world would remember your name forever. Cameras were positioned, microphones were adjusted, and no one dared to breathe loudly. Aaron entered handcuffed, but with what was left of his proud posture. His gaze ran through the room as if looking for some way out that he already knew didn't exist. The jurors maintained indecipherable expressions, carrying the weight of the decisions. The judge asked for silence, and for a moment, it seemed that time stopped. The prosecutor's office waited firmly, convinced of the narrative built. The defense tried to keep hope, even though it knew it was as fragile as glass. And then, the verdict began to be read. The sentence echoed through the room like a dry blow in the air. Guilty. The word reverberated like thunder, crossing cameras, televisions, cell phones. Aaron didn't react immediately. For a few seconds, he remained motionless, almost petrified. Then, his expression slowly fell, as if he finally understood the inevitable end. Family members cried in silence, muffling sobs while holding each other's hands. The audience followed live, divided between shock and a sense of justice. The prosecutor's office maintained a serious stance, as if carrying the duty fulfilled. The defense lowered its head, knowing that the fight had ended there. And Aaron, for the first time, seemed completely alone. Without the shield of fame, without the brightness of crowded arenas, without the support of the team. Only him, his past, and the sentence that would accompany him to death. While the judge finished the speech, Aaron stared at the floor as if looking for invisible answers. But the only possible answer had already been said. Court guardians approached and led him out of the room. The cameras followed him, capturing every step, every gesture, every shadow on his face. And that image, that of the player being dragged by justice, became the symbol of his collapse. The whole country discussed the case, analyzed and debated as if it were a sporting event. But for Aaron, that was the official end of the dream that he never knew how to sustain. In the dark corridors of the court, the echo of the sentence seemed to haunt him. Guilty. A label that would accompany him until the last day. And when the metal door closed behind him, it was as if the whole world had decided that his story was sealed. The hero was dead. Only the shattered man who walked towards the ultimate darkness remained. And so, the final fall was consummated, public, relentless and irreversible. Aaron's last nights in prison were marked by a strange silence. A silence that even the guards noticed and commented on. He seemed calmer than usual, as if he had accepted a fate that he fought for years. He spent long periods sitting in bed, staring at nothing. Sometimes, I wrote long letters, other times I tore the pages before finishing them. The guards noticed that he smiled from time to time, small smiles, almost broken. None of them knew if it was relief or disguised despair. Aaron received few visits at that stage. And when he received, his eyes seemed distant, as if his mind was elsewhere. He talked little, answered with short sentences and vague looks. It seemed to carry a weight that no one else could understand. That last night, he wrote something different, faster, more decisive. He folded the leaves carefully and kept them near the bed. Then, he walked through the cell for endless minutes. He ran his hands over his face, his hair, the wall. As if I was trying to feel everything before everything disappeared. At 2 in the morning, the cameras recorded him getting up calmly. No hesitation, no hurry, no looking back. The final act was as silent as it was disturbing. There were no screams, no fight, just a decision made in the darkness of the dawn. When the guards arrived, the entire corridor was paralyzed. The news spread in seconds, and the prison plunged into a heavy and surreal atmosphere. Some inmates hit the bars, others were in absolute silence. The medical team ran, but there was nothing left to be done. The letter was found and collected quickly. And inside it were phrases that still generate debate. Requests for forgiveness, confused words, reflections on his childhood. And a final excerpt that sounded like a silent scream. Of someone who never found peace within himself. Aaron Hernandez's death was not only the end of a case, but the definitive collapse of a life full of shadows. While the police were investigating what happened, the media was preparing to turn that into global headlines. But in that cold cell, between walls that witnessed his despair, silence was the only absolute truth. The end came without applause, without shouting, without hope. And the story of the man who lived between glory and darkness. It reached the darkest point of all. White heavy checkmark days after his death, experts analyzed Aaron Hernandez's brain. In a silent laboratory, away from the cameras and noise. The results shocked even the most experienced scientists. The brain tissue had a devastating level of CTE, a stage so advanced that it was rarely found, even in much older players. It was as if Aaron's brain had aged for decades. Under the weight of blows, traumas and repeated impacts. Researchers were silent for long seconds. They immediately understood what that meant. The Hernandez case would change the conversation about mental health in the NFL forever. The discovery spread quickly, causing amazement throughout the country. People tried to reconcile the diagnosis with the violent details of the case. Experts explained that severe CTE could cause emotional deterioration, paranoia, impulsiveness, outbursts of aggressiveness and deep mental instability. And many began to see Aaron not only as a criminal, but as someone crushed by factors that no one had dealt with in time. The NFL reacted cautiously, trying to distance yourself without seeming indifferent. The league knew that it would open a deep wound. Questions began to arise about responsibility, prevention, and negligence. Journalists questioned how much the franchise knew, how much was ignored, how much could have been avoided. And families of other players came together to ask for more serious investigation. Aaron's tragedy suddenly became part of a bigger and systemic problem. Doctors showed images of the brain, each one more disturbing than the previous one. It was impossible to ignore the extreme damage. And this rewrote the public narrative about his last year of life. The revelation of the CTE did not erase his crimes, but it explained the depth of its deterioration. It showed the complexity of a man destroyed from the inside. Even before the world discovered his actions, the country was divided between empathy and condemnation, and the debates about safety in sports have reached levels never seen before. Aaron's personal tragedy became a national symbol of a system that charges its players too much. And at that moment, the case was no longer just a crime story, and it became a cruel reflection on human limits and the devastating price of glory in the NFL. White heavy checkmark after the revelation of the CTE, the Hernandez case exploded again in the headlines, as if the country had been pulled back to the beginning of history. Journalists reconstructed every step, every decision, every moment of their career. Analysts debated night after night about responsibility, guilt, consequences, and the gigantic failures of the system. In the streets, people argued as if it were a tragic soap opera, in which no one could point out a single culprit. The line between victim and villain became more and more hazy. Sports programs showed images of him in the fields, running, vibrating, celebrating touchdowns with absurd intensity. And then they showed scenes from the court, of the cold cell, of the letter left last night. Duality was too brutal to be ignored. Parents began to question whether they would let their children play American football. Former coaches remembered Aaron as a talented but restless young man, someone who seemed to carry internal storms that no one knew how to calm. The NFL tried to contain the damage, announcing new measures, protocols, exams, speeches that sounded more reactive than preventive. But it was too late to regain the trust of many people. The Hernandez case has become a symbol of a sport that offers glory, but it hides a price that is sometimes only revealed when it's too late. Studies on CTE began to emerge at a frantic pace, exposing dark realities that were previously conveniently ignored. His family sued the league, alleging negligence, irresponsibility, and lack of protection. And meanwhile, fans were still arguing if Aaron was a monster or a man destroyed by his own environment. Books, documentaries, and podcasts explored his life, as if they were trying to decipher a dead-end labyrinth. But none of them could fully capture the depth of the tragedy that unfolded before everyone. Because the Hernandez case didn't just talk about murder or illness. He talked about fame, violence, masculinity, pressure, trauma, and silence. It was the story of a young man who climbed too high, too fast, to then plummet in such a devastating way that the whole country is still trying to understand how that was possible. And even after his death, its name kept carrying a heavy, almost scary echo, a legacy not of glory, but of warning, a mirror that the NFL was afraid to look at for too long, and a reminder that the biggest enemy is not always outside. Sometimes he grows inside his own mind. White heavy checkmark after the tragedy, childhood friends began to give emotional testimonials. Some talked about the smiling boy who ran through the streets. Others remembered moments when they noticed something strange and never commented. Each testimony added a new layer to the mystery about who Aaron really was before fame swallowed everything. Family members revealed intimate stories, telling about pains that he carried quietly, like someone who tries to survive alone. Teachers remembered the talented student, but also of the young man easily irritated, difficult to control. Former teammates said he had sudden explosions, behaviors that at the time were normalized as competitive temperament. But now, seen in the light of the diagnosis, those signs became alarming and deeply tragic. With each new report, the country was divided even more. Some felt compassion. Others reinforced that nothing justified the crime he committed. And both were right and wrong at the same time. Because the truth about Aaron was made of fragments that would never fit perfectly. His story was too painful to be simple. It's too complex to have a single villain. Meanwhile, experts debated the psychological impact. To live in an environment that glamorizes violence since adolescence. They showed studies, graphs, images of the damaged brain. The audience watched in shock, trying to process all that. Interview programs brought together doctors, former players, and psychologists to discuss what could have been avoided. But the question that echoed the most was always the same. How has no one seen this before? And the answer, almost always, was an uncomfortable silence. Because maybe everyone saw it somehow. But no one wanted to be responsible for erasing the brilliance of the promise. Aaron had become, even after his death, a symbol of everything that is ignored in the name of victory. A cruel reminder that the signs were there. In the speeches, in the behaviors, in the gestures, in the excesses. But no one wanted to look closely enough. Deep down, those memories revealed an uncomfortable truth. The system that Aaron built. It also contributed to destroying it. And the shadows of his past were still alive, hovering over the NFL like a ghost that refuses to leave. While the country tried to move forward, it was impossible to forget the trail of pain he left. White heavy checkmark in the end, Aaron Hernandez's story remained like an open wound. A brutal reminder of how glory can turn into darkness. The crowded arenas, the screams of the fans, the bright spotlights, all this collapsed quickly, revealing what was behind the show. And the whole country realized it too late. That the line between an idol and a nightmare can be extremely thin. His tragedy made it impossible to ignore certain questions. How much is a player's body really worth? How much of mental health is sacrificed in the name of entertainment? How many talents are living on the edge, paying a silent price while the world applauds? The NFL invested billions to try to remedy the damage, launching campaigns, policies, and protocols. But many believe that all this came after too many lives were devastated. And the image of Aaron, alone in that cell, it has become a symbol of what no one wants to face. At the same time, his story imposed deep reflections. About toxic masculinity, about internalized violence, about the cult of the athlete who hides invisible wounds. His meteoric career served as a warning. Then what happens when extreme talent finds untreated pain? And no matter how much time passes, your name will continue to be mentioned as part of the debate. The fans remember him with a mixture of horror and sadness, knowing that rise and fall will never be forgotten. Because Aaron Hernandez was more than a scandal, more than a headline, more than a police case. He was a symptom of something bigger. A symptom that exposed the cracks of a sport loved by millions. And when this story comes to an end, it is clear that there are no winners here. The pain spread to victims, family members, fans, and the sport itself. What remains is only the brutal lesson. The message that resonates in the shadows of the game. A warning that glory has limits. And surpassing them can destroy everything. In the final silence, while the stadium lights go out, the Hernandez case echoes like a ghost, who keeps walking among the NFL corridors. And his story, marked by talent, violence, pain, and darkness, remains as an eternal alert about the devastating price of glory in the most brutal sport in America. If you watched it until the end, it's because you want to see the NFL side that no one shows. So sign up, activate the bell, and join the dark side. Here, stories are not softened, and the truth is never ignored.